Voilà. Voilà, no. Alohe, alohe, alohe.
You are. Let me write to Sophie. Sophie is not. The G is not here. Il y a plusieurs podiums, vous êtes dans le dernier. Excellency colleagues, good morning to who has made it today to room 3 of Palais des Nations. We are just waiting for the Director General of UNOC to join us here in this room. And you were welcomed today by Dietrich Sion Ulukoa Duai Lonsod. I hope I have pronounced your name correctly. Who is representing the native Hawaiian organizations Kaiukio Kapo, Ola Anio, and Kiawe Kupono, Oka Ua, and the indigenous Chamorro organizations Adai Manoatao Eta Mona and the Mana Adai Coalition. And he's sitting there with two other colleagues, representatives of indigenous peoples who are attending this week and were also attending last week the negotiation currently ongoing at the World International Intellectual Property Organization, WIPO. And so a very warm welcome to you. And I'm just looking at the room to see if the Director General is entering or not, to start giving you a few more words. What should I do? I'm looking at my co-moderator here.
I would let everyone relax for 2 minutes and then start when she arrives.
Okay. So with that, so good morning, Ms. Director General. So this year team, you have all joined us today to the at Palais des Nations to celebrate the International Day for Biodiversity, which is celebrated every year indeed on the 22nd of May, commemorating the adoption of the text of the Convention on Biological Diversity in 1992. This year's theme, Be Part of the Plan, is a call to action for all stakeholders to halt and reverse the loss of biodiversity by supporting the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, also referred to as the Biodiversity Plan. We couldn't miss this opportunity to bring together many of those who are actively involved in the implementation of the Biodiversity Plan in International Geneva to join us this morning, and we ended up with a large panel. This is just the first part of the panel that you see here on the podium. Our leaders today regularly refer to the triple planetary crisis that humanity currently faces of climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. Each of these issues have their own causes and effects with interlinkages, and each issue needs to be resolved if we are to have a viable future on this planet. Our World Environmental Must-To-Do list for 2024 and for the decades into the future, as referred to by the Executive Director of the United Nations Environment Programme, is to slow and adapt to climate change, protect and restore nature and biodiversity, reverse land degradation and desertification, and end pollution and waste. Member states have adopted global deals that set agreed goals and targets, such as the Paris Agreement, the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which we are celebrating today, and the Global Framework on Chemicals. Biodiversity and nature conservation are mainstreamed in the multilateral activities of International Geneva, home of some of the key institutions that actively contribute to setting the global agenda to tackle the biodiversity crisis, which we have brought together this morning. Before you are formally welcome, let me mention that our event today is streamed, and the video is available on the webpage of the event, which link is shared on the various slides. You were welcome today, as I mentioned, before the Director General of UNOG joined us, by a representative of indigenous people who with a magnificent chant, and we are really very much delighted to have with us representatives of the indigenous people, those who are at the front line of protecting our planet, and we wouldn't imagine celebrating this day today without them on the table. So to formally welcome you today at the Palais des Nations, we are joined by the Director General of the United Nations Office in Geneva, Ms. Tatiana Valayova, who will be followed by His Excellency Ambassador Julien Tony, who is the Deputy Permanent Representative of Switzerland to the United Nations Office and other international organizations in Geneva. And after those two welcoming remarks, Ms. Caroline Dierbierbeck, who is the Executive Director of the Forum on Trade, Environment and SDGs, also known as TESS, at the Graduate Institute, will then moderate the celebration. So without further ado, Ms. Valayova, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I really would like to sincerely thank the Geneva Environmental Network and the Convention on Biological Diversity for bringing all of us together to celebrate the Biodiversity Day 2024. And I am particularly pleased to welcome you all in the Palais des Nations. Here we are surrounded by our beautiful Ariana Park, which is really an example which shows that even in a city, within the city, you can have lots of greenery and lots of biodiversity. Because, of course, you know about our famous peacocks, but we also have foxes, we have common kestrel, we have common swifts, many other species, and, of course, our bees. And yesterday we celebrated here also the International Bee Day, paying special attention to pollinators. So that's exactly an example how living in a modern city, we still can really have biodiversity. Ladies and gentlemen, we are currently facing a triple planetary crisis that includes climate change, pollution, and biodiversity loss. These challenges are interlinked, with climate change poised to become the dominant cause of biodiversity loss in the near future. Already, 1 million species of plants and animals are at risk of extinction, and 40% of the world's population, equivalent to 3.2 billion people, are affected by land degradation. Humankind is the primary driver of this environmental crisis. We are contaminating land, oceans, fresh water with toxic pollutants, wrecking landscapes and ecosystems, and disrupting our climate with greenhouse gas emissions. Decimating biodiversity not only hampers sustainable development today, but also threatens a dangerous and uncertain future for generations to come. The coming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, also known as the Biodiversity Plan, offers a pathway to reverse biodiversity loss while fostering job creation, holding resilience, and spurring sustainable development. Adopted in 2022, this framework aims to halt and reverse nature loss by protecting 30% of our planet's land and waters by 2030. Ladies and gentlemen, governments, of course, must lead the realization of the plan. But as this year's International Day for Biological Diversity reminds us, we are all part of the plan. We all have a role to play. Indigenous peoples, businesses, financial institutions, local and regional authorities, civil society, women, young people, and academia must all work together to value, protect, and restore biodiversity for the benefits of all. Today's meeting provides us all a multi-stakeholder platform for such a meaningful exchange. And International Geneva, home to numerous key institutions, plays a pivotal role in setting the global agenda to address the biodiversity crisis. The institutions based here are instrumental in driving the implementation of the framework, highlighting Geneva's unique position in the global environmental landscape. Today's event provides an opportunity to raise awareness about biodiversity loss and the consequences for humanity. As we mark this day for biological diversity, let us commit to be part of the plan. Let us act urgently to put biodiversity on a path to recover and build momentum towards CBD COP16 in October, protecting the planet and creating a greener, bluer, and more sustainable world for the new generations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director General. We'll have now the representative of the host country, Switzerland, Ambassador Tony. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, it is my great pleasure also to welcome you all to celebrate the Biodiversity Day here in Geneva at the Palais des Nations. It is easy to see the common points between the International Day for Biological Diversity and Geneva, of course, also with the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity being located not in Geneva, but in Montreal. The landscape of actors and institutions in the field of biodiversity is in itself multiple, often compared with a meadow during the month of May with a multitude of flowers and colors. Some of these flowers are growing here in Geneva area, CITES, Ramsar, IUCN, to name a few. Others come to Geneva for meetings or are closely connected with nature, such as UNEP, the Basel Rotterdam Stockholm Conventions, among others. And finally, even organizations that are not directly linked to biodiversity become more and more aware that mankind, our societies, and our economies depend on what nature offers as food, also as raw materials. No wonder that several business organizations, such as the WEF, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, or Business for Nature, focus more and more on nature, the protection of the system, and the sustainable use of biodiversity. But still, biodiversity loss remains somehow the silent sister of climate change. The Swiss government therefore welcomes the initiative taken by the Geneva Environmental Network to commemorate the International Day for Biological Diversity here in Geneva, at the crossroads of international debate between environment, pollution, health, trade, labor, and human rights. The right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment was born in Geneva, in the Human Rights Council, and is spreading out in many other policy areas. This mainstreaming of nature into all sectors of our lives and human activities to be nature positive is the only way to maintain and sustain the basis of our livelihood. After the Paris Agreement in 2015, we have seen at the end of 2022 the adoption of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, GBF. We have now a global strategy with 23 targets and quantitative goals to guide the international community in its efforts to protect nature and to stop the loss of biodiversity. It is not just the extinction of endangered species contained in the red list of the IUCN that is at stake, but beyond, it is our ability to adapt to climate change and to fight pollution. Switzerland will update its National Action Plan and align with the goal and the target of the GBF. It is also expected that other states will do the same, and other multilateral environmental agreements will endorse the GBF and contribute to the achievement of its targets. Addressing biodiversity loss requires global cooperation and concerted efforts at all levels, from local communities to international organizations. Together with UNEP, Switzerland has launched the so-called Bern process to allow processes, conventions, and organizations to discuss how to coordinate action, how to mainstream the concern for nature in their programs. Several of these institutions and actors take part in today's event, and I want to mention also the participation of the Canton of Geneva as an example of the importance of subnational actors to protect biodiversity. We welcome all efforts to reach the Kunming-Montreal targets and thank the Geneva Environmental Network to bring us together in this event and present our common activities to conserve nature. I'm looking forward to fruitful discussions and thank you so much for your interest and participation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Tony, and thank you also, Madam Director General, for your opening remarks, setting the scene, and for welcoming all of us here today to this Biodiversity Day celebration. And good morning to all of you for taking the time to be here, to be part of this event today. We're here to celebrate biodiversity, to celebrate the Global Biodiversity Plan, and also the role of International Geneva in helping us to implement that. I know there are many more who will be following us live stream online, so also thank you for taking that time as well. Before I turn to the other speakers, I thought it would be appropriate just to congratulate again the Geneva Environment Network for pulling together such an extraordinary array of thought leaders today and institutions from within and beyond Geneva. It's really an extraordinary thing, and I think it takes forward the advice that we received from the UNOG Director General earlier, that implementing the plan will take all of us, and all of us have a part in implementing that plan. So thank you for that effort today. Of course, my challenge in that context is to keep you all energized for a 2-hour marathon. What I thought we could think of it is as a journey. And on the journey, we're going to put together all of the different pieces of the puzzle of what it will take to implement the Global Biodiversity Plan and to work collaboratively. So I think this morning we'll hear from many of the different actors who have a key role to play in that effort. What we know is that we have the 4 core goals of the Global Biodiversity Framework are to protect and restore nature, to prosper with nature, to share nature's benefits fairly, and also to invest and collaborate in ways that will ensure we can implement the plan. Today, I'm sure with our speakers, we'll hear about the urgency of this task, the scale of the challenges at hand, commercial tensions, economic tensions, the range of tough decisions that will need to be made, but also the many, many opportunities for collaboration, the solutions that are out there, and the diversity of work that's going on all around the world to try and take this agenda forward. So I'm looking forward to being inspired about the role of international cooperation and collaboration with stakeholders. So with that, I'd like to turn back to our high-level panel, and I'm delighted to introduce His Excellency Ambassador Shen, who's the Deputy Permanent Representative of China to the UN office in Geneva. You have the floor.
To Caroline and Madam Director General, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. Good morning. It is a pleasure to participate in this event and celebrate this year's International Day for Biological Diversity. The theme of this year's event, Be Part of the Plan, is very pertinent. Biodiversity is the foundation of human survival and development. The conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity is a matter of great importance for the well-being of all humankind and our future generations. Biodiversity and the ecosystems feature prominently across many of the Sustainable Development Goals and associated targets. As one of the first countries to sign and ratify the CBD, China has actively participated in the global biodiversity governance, making a positive contribution to building a community with all life on Earth. The COP15 issued the Kunming Declaration and other high-level political outcome documents and facilitated the conclusion of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. This framework represents an ambitious, pragmatic, and transformative package of solutions that promotes joint efforts of the international community to put biodiversity on the path to recovery and benefit all humankind and all future generations. On the occasion of the hosting the COP15, China announced the contribution of 1.5 billion RMB to set up the Kunming Biodiversity Fund, which has effectively boosted global confidence in biodiversity conservation. China has become the largest contributor to the core budget of the CBD and the largest developing country contributing to the Global Environment Fund. China has also worked together with multiple countries and international organizations in launching an initiative for Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, thus creating a platform for cooperation among parties and stakeholders to promote the full implementation of the framework. In recent years, China has actively participated in international exchanges and cooperation, advocating establishment of the Belt and Road Initiative International Green Development Coalition, further promoting South-South cooperation on biodiversity conservation. We stand ready to work hand in hand with the international community to maintain a fair and reasonable global order for biodiversity conservation, advance the implementation of the UN 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and promote harmonious coexistence between humans and nature. To conclude, I would wish this event and the COP16 to be held this October in Colombia a great success. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Shen, and thank you for your leadership and China's leadership on the Biodiversity Plan. 3 words that I took away from your intervention was that the plan is ambitious, transformative, and pragmatic. So we thank you also for the role that you are playing in advancing implementation of that nationally and supporting international implementation as well. So you mentioned the upcoming COP16, and on that note, it's my great pleasure to introduce Ambassador Gustavo Gayon, who is the permanent representative of Colombia to the UN office in Geneva.
Thank you, Caroline. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, let me thank especially Mrs. Diana Rizzolio of the Geneva Environment Network for the organization of this event, as well as all speakers who have joined us today in celebration of the International Day for Biological Diversity. As we commemorate the 32nd anniversary of the adoption of the Convention on Biological Diversity, it is my distinct honor and pleasure to address you as the future host of CBD COP16, which will be held from October 21st to November 1st in Cali, Colombia. As one of the most biologically diverse countries in the world, Colombia is deeply honored to host COP16. We also see it as an opportunity to call for concrete and ambitious actions to reverse biodiversity loss and to start building strong foundations from the first COP taking place after the adoption of the Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. We are at a critical juncture where we must reaffirm our wholehearted commitment to our planet and our future generations. The triple planetary crisis of biodiversity loss, pollution, and climate change not only threatens the health of our ecosystems, but also undermines the possibility of achieving sustainable development in all its dimensions, as well as building fair, inclusive, and equitable societies. This is a crisis that disproportionately affects the developing world and persons in vulnerable situations. This is why we believe it is imperative to change the way we relate to nature and to come to the collective realization that there will be no peace among us as long as we are not able to make peace with nature. It is in such a vein that the government of Colombia has decided that the theme of COP16 will be peace with nature, in order to reflect a holistic view of the shape our relationship with nature should take. My government is also committed to making this a COP where indigenous peoples, people of African descent, civil society, women, youth, and peasants are at the forefront of discussions. We want the voice of all those who are guardians of biodiversity and of those who suffer most from the impacts of the triple planetary crisis to be at the center of the decisions that will be adopted. We also want that this COP may contribute to the achievement of environmental and social justice in Colombia and around the world. Thank you for your time, and we hope to see you in Cali, Colombia, to keep pushing this agenda forward as we strive to protect life and harmony with nature. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Vaillant. I think it's so fitting today that we're here in the Palais des Nations, which was founded on this idea of peace between nations, between communities around the world, to also be focusing on the idea that we also need to be building and fostering peace with nature. So that's a great message to have here somehow in this house and context. Thank you for that. And I also note that both you and Ambassador Shen mentioned the importance of the wider sustainable development agenda as setting also part of the framework for our discussions on nature as we go forward. So I'm moving next to the next speaker is Pedro Manuel Moreno, who is the Deputy Secretary General of UN Trade and Development, housed here also in the Palais.
Excellencies, dear friends, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, today we gather to celebrate Biodiversity Day and to acknowledge the importance of biodiversity for our planet and our well-being. As we all know, biodiversity is essential for life. It provides us with the air we breathe, the water we drink, and the food we eat. But it's not just about providing basic needs. Biodiversity also supports and builds resilience in our economies. But despite its importance, biodiversity is declining at alarming rates. Up to 40% of the world's land is being degraded, and 1 million plant and animal species are at risk of extinction. This loss of biodiversity has far-reaching consequences for our planet and our economies. Addressing the triple planetary crisis of climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution is an immense task. It requires integrating environmental and biodiversity-friendly considerations into our trade and development policies, promoting sustainable practices, reducing waste and pollution, and protecting natural habitats. And there are also opportunities. In fact, trade in biodiversity-based products amounted to around $3.4 trillion in 2022, making up almost 17% of worldwide exports. Low-income economies face even greater economic dependence on these products, with this trade often constituting over 40% of their exports in the past decade. The UN Trade and Development has been a pioneer in recognizing the potential of trade and biodiversity for developing countries in promoting sustainable development. Since 1996, we have underscored that trade under sustainability criteria can contribute to addressing biodiversity loss. For this purpose, we had launched the Biotrade Initiative. This initiative has grown significantly, with uptake by governments, businesses, and civil society in over 80 countries. At the core of the initiative are the Biotrade principles and criteria that maybe you are familiar with, a set of guidelines of promoting sustainability across the entire value chain. The turnover from companies, associations, and projects implementing these principles and criteria has soared from $40 million in 2003 to almost $31 billion in 2022, literally moving from millions to billions. The UN Trade and Development has also been instrumental in bridging the trade and biodiversity communities through events such as the Biotrade Congresses. These congresses have brought together stakeholders from around the world to exchange, foster cooperation, and enhance understanding on trade biodiversity issues. And as we move forward, it is essential that we continue to build on this progress. We need joint coordination and accelerated action from all stakeholders, including governments, businesses, civil society, to implement the Biodiversity Plan and achieve our goals. So, ladies and gentlemen, let us continue to work together to protect biodiversity, to promote sustainable development, and of course, I also hope to see you all in Colombia at the next COP16. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pedro, also for reminding us of the socioeconomic dimensions of tackling the biodiversity crisis, and also that there are opportunities, and for many developing countries, that these opportunities to work with nature and support sustainable production and consumption and trade are ones that they're very interested in as we move forward in the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Plan. Next on our agenda, we will have a video message from the CBD Secretary General, David Cooper. But just before he does, we're going to do a number of choreographies this morning because we have different speakers. So we're going to rotate our current speakers off and bring our next round of speakers on while we're listening to David Cooper's presentation. But just before then, I wanted to quickly thank again this round of speakers for welcoming us all, providing the leadership, and particularly wish Colombia the very best for the COP16 in Cali. I think there's already a great deal of excitement about the leadership and commitment and energy that your country is bringing to this process. So thank you all. And with that, I'll turn now to David Cooper.
This International Day for Biological Diversity, I invite you all to be part of the plan, the Biodiversity Plan. The Biodiversity Plan, or the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, is humanity's best chance to halt and reverse biodiversity loss and live in harmony with nature. Currently, governments are working to revise their national biodiversity strategies and action plans to ensure they are aligned with the plan. Governments are expected to present their NBSAPs at the next meeting of the parties to the convention, COP16 in Cali, Colombia, which will be held under the theme, Peace with Nature. For the plan to work, however, we need a whole of society approach that includes everyone. We need civil society, indigenous peoples, local communities, women, youth, business, finance, and academia. We can all be part of the plan. Through informed purchasing decisions, citizens can relieve the pressure exerted on biodiversity, one shopping cart at a time. Through their votes and engagement in the political process, citizens can prompt politicians to embrace the Biodiversity Plan as a domestic policy priority. The private sector can take responsibility to align their business and investment decisions with human well-being and nature's health. Civil society and youth can continue to promote awareness and advocate for action. Together, we must respect the traditional knowledge of indigenous peoples and local communities as true custodians of biodiversity. We must empower youth and women, and we must do all of this to put nature on a path to recovery for the benefit of people and the planet. The goals and targets of the Biodiversity Plan are indeed ambitious. They are also necessary. Achieving them is the only realistic option to ensure a livable planet. We must all work together, today and every day. We must all be part of the plan.
So thank you very much to David Cooper also for bringing us that presentation all the way from Ottawa. I think the thing that he really emphasized at the end was this idea that we are all custodians of nature, and all of us, have a part to play in this plan. The whole broad range of civil society actors, stakeholders, institutions, governments in different level, and so on are called upon to be part of this transformative and ambitious agenda. So to continue our journey this morning, I'd like to introduce our new panel of speakers who are here. The purpose of this part of the panel is really to focus on the role of International Geneva in implementing the Biodiversity Plan. One thing I always find extraordinary and exciting about being here in International Geneva is the range of people doing excellent work in collaboration with each other around International Geneva and also with colleagues around the world. So today we're trying to get a bit of a handle on what different colleagues are doing, how they're working together, what they see as the priorities, and how we can work together more proactively and effectively going forward. So with that in mind, I'm really delighted to start with leaders from two of the world's largest and oldest environmental organizations who provided leadership for over 60 years on the environment agenda globally and have really brought together and driven the engagement of the public at large, scientists, stakeholders, campaigners, and so on. So in that respect, I'm going to turn firstly to Kirsten Schout, who is the Director General of WWF International. Kirsten.
Thank you so much. And good morning, ladies and gentlemen, excellencies. So as we celebrate this day today, which I know is a really important day for all of us, and we should be celebrating, I also can't help but feel restless and impatient. Because while the Biodiversity Plan is a key agreement to halt and reverse the decline of biodiversity loss by 2030, and we rightly celebrate, what we really need, the mic isn't on.
No, it
It is? Okay, good. What we really need is to show action, because commitments are nothing if they're not delivered upon, and so far global action has been too slow and too little. We all know that the devastating impacts of climate change and nature loss are all around us. The situation today is worse than many of us predicted 10 years ago. And everyone everywhere is affected. But we all know what needs to be done. Every country needs to implement the Biodiversity Plan on the ground, applying a human rights-based approach and addressing the drivers of biodiversity loss. The next Biodiversity Summit, COP16 in Colombia, and I would like to congratulate and thank the government of Colombia for their leadership in this, is such an important opportunity to take stock, to see how serious countries really are, and enhance the urgency for implementation of the plan. Because 2030 is only 5.5 years away. So let's use COP16 to ramp up the pressure and ensure that we make the most out of the next 5.5 years. And for that, 4 things are needed. First of all, countries need to translate the GBF into concrete action in their own countries. As a first step in implementing the GBF, countries have committed to revising their national plans, the MBSAPs, to align their national targets with the GBF. Many countries have started revising these plans, and some have even published them. This is a crucial component of COP16. Governments need to demonstrate progress on the implementation of GBF targets, and they need to commit to increased ambition, urgency, and corrective action in the implementation if they are off track. Second, protecting and conserving 30% of land and water is extremely important, but that alone will not be enough. Governments, businesses, and financial institutions must reform damaging practices that are incentivizing nature loss, exacerbating climate change, and eroding the human rights of indigenous people and local communities. Therefore, a comprehensive mainstreaming of the biodiversity agenda in support of implementation will need to be adopted at COP16. And International Geneva, everybody here present today, has such a crucial role to play to ensure that the Biodiversity Plan is implemented, and most notably through action on trade policies, human rights, and health. This is not just a biodiversity agenda alone. Third, COP16 can and should be the People's COP, ensuring equal access to all stakeholders and rights holders on decisions, benefits, and finance. And lastly, I cannot not talk about financing. An important issue that has to be scrutinized at COP16 are the biodiversity commitments that many governments and countries have made in the Biodiversity Plan. And I think you'd all agree with me that resource mobilization is so essential, if not the essential enabler for the implementation of the plan. That applies to the Biodiversity Plan like any other framework or set of goals and targets. And the most important resource mobilization commitment for the plan is to deliver $20 billion annually by 2025, and that's next year. To catalyze this, I'm happy to share that today, on Biodiversity Day, the 20 billion by 2025 for Nature campaign is officially launched. This is a global campaign to achieve the $20 billion nature finance target by 2025. And WWF is a proud member alongside many other international NGOs, and I know some of you are present here today. The purpose of this campaign is to join forces with others and to push countries to step up to get this commitment over the finish line by next year. We believe not only that providing accessible resources to countries swiftly is important for the implementation of the plan, we also think that this is important for countries to prove that they're serious about their signatures on the GBF and to walk the talk. These $20 billion for next year will have to be mostly coming from ODA at the moment, as other funding streams are not yet well enough developed. However, WWF looks forward to working with others to look into other crucial financing mechanisms that will be needed. For example, blended finance trust funds like PFPs, impact investing, payments for ecosystem services, and debt swaps. The OECD estimates that currently international funding for biodiversity is 11 billion per year. So delivering the 20 billion promise means more or less a doubling of the status quo by next year. So let's roll up our sleeves, ramp up the pressure, and ensure that the Biodiversity Plan is fully implemented by 2030 for nature and for people everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Kirsten. It makes me feel that the title of this panel should have been Let's Celebrate and Let's Also Keep It Real. So I think that you've made a great call to action in terms of walking the talk, holding governments to account on these commitments to translate them into action. But I think you've also underlined just the urgency of the task, both the urgency of the impacts that communities face around the world, especially compounded by climate impacts, and the need to get the policy frameworks right if we're not going to further disincentivize all the good work that we're trying to encourage at the same time on the biodiversity agenda. And thank you for announcing also here today with us the 20 billion by 2025 for nature campaign. So I'm sure we'll hear about that from others today as well. Thank you very much, Kirsten. It's now my great pleasure to turn to Corinne Sigwart, who is a senior policy advisor at IUCN, to give us an insight as to how IUCN is seeing the ways forward on this topic. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Excellencies, dear colleagues from nature and from the world all over, dear colleagues from Geneva especially. I want to start from IUCN by tackling a little bit how IUCN is seeing to be part of the plan. Perhaps we have to take a step back to develop a plan and to celebrate this plan. We have to reflect how the plan was developed. So IUCN, the members of IUCN, and many of you here in the room are by your governments or organizations member of IUCN. The members provided IUCN with a strong mandate to be part of the plan and also to develop this plan. I want to quote one of the resolution members give us. They call on the Director General of IUCN, and all of IUCN means you all, countries, governments, non-state actors, to continue to contribute to the development of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework and to fully support the Global Biodiversity Framework once adopted through the implementation of the IUCN program that was issued for 2021 to 2024, Nature 2030, that's the name, and the addendum. What does this mean concretely? This means that conservation of at least 30% globally of terrestrial, freshwater, inland waters, and marine ecosystems, the 30 by 30. This means also the recognition of indigenous peoples and local communities' rights, including over lands, territories, and resources. It means also scaling up of science, of species conservation through the Global Species Action Plan. It means also restoration of degraded ecosystems at scale. Also the integration of a right-based approach consistently and comprehensively, and appropriate recognition of nature-based solutions. And finally, increased financial resources, as my colleague Kirsten from WWF already said, from all sources and international conservation finance flows. So this is rather theoretically, you would say. So what does this mean coming to implementation? How is IUCN helping to implement and support the implementation of the Biodiversity Plan? Also here, I want to quote the commitments from Marseille, the last conservation forum of IUCN, where members adopted a resolution that sounds following: halting biodiversity loss by committing to a transformative, we heard this word, effective and ambitious post-2020 global biodiversity framework. For this, understanding transformed ecosystem better. First, committing to an ambitious, interconnected and effective site-based conservation network. Secondly, thirdly, mobilizing partnership to accelerate restoration. And fourth, fostering effective conservation of species, ecosystem, and genetic diversity. This means for IUCN, we have to identify opportunities and priorities of action. So contribute to implementation through the IUCN program and resolutions and recommendations. We will have next year the next IUCN World Conservation Congress. This will be a momentum also for the IUCN community to give further, not only advice, but guidance how to adopt the strategy, IUCN strategy and program with this regard. Because so far the IUCN's Nature 2030 program, we had mapped the different targets of the GBF with the main work activities from IUCN, means in climate, in waters, in ocean, on land, and with people. And looking at this mapping to the GBF targets, we realized that we have a lot of convergence with Goal A and the targets in the first half of the GBF. But it is expected that we have to revise this IUCN program and to be more convergence also with the rest. Secondly, IUCN is developing guidance and assistance for, we have heard it, the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plans. This is really important to highlight that through the regional offices and the regional engagement IUCN is having in more than 50 regional offices all over the world, we are supporting countries in doing these national action plans accordingly. Thirdly, IUCN's knowledge, products and guidance. This is one of the most important ways in which IUCN contributes to the GBF implementation through knowledge, data, tools and guidance. Many of IUCN's data sets are part of the monitoring framework. We have heard about the red list. Lastly, I want to highlight an important area of the GBF work which relates to IUCN's working hand in hand with indigenous peoples, in particular our indigenous people organization members. We have some of them here. Thank you. First, at the time of the negotiations, to align some points in our positions and later on to ensure that the role of indigenous peoples in the GBF targets keeps on being recognized in the implementation phase. This said, and this is my last remark, being here, IUCN as a unique organization that has, as I said, both state and non-state members, including members that are indigenous people organizations, as well as subnational authorities, including cities, with a network of over 16,000 scientists worldwide, we have a lot to offer, but we cannot do anything with building on synergies here with UN system, but also with MEAs and other organizations. The International Geneva is very, very important for us to build on this network and to celebrate not only biodiversity, but to implement the most needed targets in the future with all them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karine, also for underlining the very unique role that IUCN plays in the global environmental agenda and bringing together stakeholders, governments, and the scientific community. 60,000 scientists is impressive, and we're all grateful that you bring that to bear and that you're interested in seeking synergies with other players around International Geneva. So the next phase of this discussion, we're moving into several of the multilateral environment agreements that are based or headquartered with their secretariats here in International Geneva. And they have a key role to play in driving forward different parts of the biodiversity agenda and also international or multilateral cooperation in this respect. So the first person I'd like to invite is Yvonne Higuero, who's Secretary General of the CITES Secretariat. Just before I give you the floor, I remembered I was supposed to say at the beginning, as we're in Switzerland, I have my Swiss bell. So what I'm going to do, because we have such a long lineup and we want to hear from everyone, at 4.5 minutes, I will just ring the bell. So you're neither late nor early. It just gives you an awareness that there's half a minute to go. Wonderful. Thank you very much, Yvonne.
Moderator, and thanks to Jen for the invitation to this very interesting discussion. Happy Biodiversity Day to everyone, and thank you for the bell. As a Latina and only given 5 minutes, it's quite difficult to be able to manage time, so I'm glad that you will ring the bell for me. If anything, I would like to, with what I'm going to say, I would like to make sure that I come across with 3 messages. One of them is to, again, highlight and underline, as others have said, that it is absolutely necessary to cooperate and collaborate amongst all of us. Let's be honest, many of us as organizations, as secretariats, are competing for scarce resources. We sometimes push each other aside. We are concerned about the financing that we are getting, but we have to change the way that we work. We have to make sure that we are complementing each other, that we are working not only at the international level, but also at the national level, and being able to find where we can work together on similar issues so we can have a bigger impact. The other thing I want to underline, and this is sometimes for people a boring subject, and it's the issue of measuring progress and indicators. And this is something that we need to talk about very seriously. It's happening right now under the GBF, that they're developing the indicators. We cannot know if we're investing in the right places, if we are putting in place the right policies, if we cannot measure progress and monitor what we are doing. So this is a very essential aspect, and I think we all have something to do with that. We must also, and this is something that has been highlighted several times, we must put people at the center of everything we do. We have talked about our indigenous peoples and our local communities, but in general, we heard earlier about how much money, how much profits are made from working on wild species, for example, from benefiting from trade and wildlife. This has an impact on livelihoods, and we have to be able to ensure that we bring them into the conversation. Now, I'll say a little bit about CITES and why we're so excited about this global biodiversity framework. We, since 1975, 184 parties that we have right now, it's almost universal membership, but this legally binding treaty, had decided to regulate the wildlife trade and to make sure that it is legal, sustainable, and traceable, and to avoid any type of impact on having these wild species in nature and make sure that they are there for future generations. So they have been committed to working on making sure that the activities under wildlife trade are non-detrimental to nature. We have now listings, we have 3 appendices where we have species that are listed, both animals and plants, to which have different protection measures. But the most surprising thing for many is that out of these more than 40,000 species, 95% of them can be traded, but they have to be strictly regulated. These are Appendix 2 species. And then, but it has to be a strict regulation. And this is why it was very important for us to be very closely involved in the development of this global biodiversity framework, because we saw a role for CITES. And again, since CITES is following up on trade of wild species, it would be important to be able to contribute to this global biodiversity framework. Most of the multilateral environmental conventions that are considered biodiversity-related conventions worked from the very beginning, and I was very pleased to see how the Convention on Biological Diversity, but many stakeholders were very appreciative of how we were looking for something that is not only for CBD, for all MEAs and for all other stakeholders who are working on biodiversity. And I'm very pleased to see here my colleague Rolf Payet, not only because he's helping with the gender diversity on the panel, but also because he's representing chemicals. And one would have thought originally, why is chemicals involved in a plan on nature and a plan on biodiversity? I'm sure he will have a lot to say about that. But we are now involving the climate change, the climate convention. We have involved the chemicals convention, and you will see many others who have a stake in ensuring that this plan is put in place. So it's about the national biodiversity strategies and action plans that were discussed a bit earlier. Here we also think it's important that when these MBSAPs are being now updated, that all of the MEAs are taken into account, because it's not only about biodiversity, but it's also about chemicals, it's also about climate. We have to ensure that we have synergies between them. And then just very shortly, about why it's so interesting for the parties to be involved, that many of the targets relate to the work that is being done under CITES, but I will say particularly Target 5, which has to do with the sustainability of the harvest and trade of wild species. Not only sustainability, but the legality and also the safety. So we are working very closely. Our parties have asked us to be able to ensure that there is an integration of the goals of the GBF into the CITES strategic vision. I think many of the other MEAs who are sitting here with me, many of my colleagues who are in the biodiversity MEAs are also doing the same, have gone through the same exercise to make sure that we are working on the same goals. So, and this will be very important in terms of measuring success with the indicators. Finally, I was asked to make a few comments about the BBNJ, or the biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction. The new kid on the block, as my colleague Sophie, who's probably here, calls it. We are very much in support of the BBNJ as CITES, because what we are looking at are these wild species, marine species, that are taken from the high seas and then brought into ports, and they have to be regulated the same as any other species with permits. If they are Appendix 2 species, they must have permits to be able to enter into these ports. So CITES is highly cooperating with the BBNJ. They have now, I believe, 60 signatories. They have to have ratification of 90 parties to be, sorry, it's 90 parties who have signed, and it needs to be ratified by 60 parties to come into force. But here, more than 50 organizations are involved in BBNJ. So here again, we have to talk about cooperation amongst all of those to be able to implement also this treaty. Finally, just to say that not only at the international level are we looking for collaboration, but we as CITES are looking for collaboration at the national level and at the subnational level, which was also brought up earlier in the speeches. And I think that this will make sure that all stakeholders, but also civil society, is closely involved with nature, with the biodiversity plan, to ensure that for future generations, we will continue to have wild species of animals and plants. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Yvonne. My challenge for today is going to be to not want to interrupt people, that I want to listen more to what they have to say. But measuring progress, people at the center, and this is important in the context of the potential for unhealthy competition, instead to look at ways that we can build synergies, complementarities, and collaboration. And certainly your work with the CITES conventions, I think not just talking about how you're going to contribute, but how you can integrate the biodiversity plan into the work of the convention is really important. It's my great pleasure now to introduce Francesca Bernardini, who is the Chief of the Transboundary Cooperation Section at the UN Economic Commission for Europe. And she brings to us expertise with a range of different UNECE conventions. So hopefully you can show us the way into how we can build some complementarity there as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caroline. And first of all, thanks a lot to Jen and to Diana for bringing us all together today and for organizing this event. So as Caroline mentioned, the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe has facilitated in the past 45 years the development of a complex framework of 5 environmental conventions and related protocol on water, air, industrial safety, public access to information and public participation, and environmental impact assessment in the transboundary context. And some of these instruments, notably the Water Convention and the Aarhus Convention, are open accession beyond the pan-European region to all UN member states. So these instruments act on the drivers of biodiversity loss. They are very powerful instruments to reinforce and sustain biodiversity efforts in many ways. And I'll try to really, as mentioned by Yvonne, to not only show the importance of cooperation, but the benefit that cooperation brings and integrated implementation. So let's start with air, the Convention on Long-Range Transboundary Air Pollution, which was negotiated in the 70s exactly to face widespread death of fish and forests, and has always therefore focused on the protection of nature and biodiversity. Practically, the Air Convention promotes the reduction of emission of sulfur and nitrogen and ground level ozone that affect flora and fauna. So we see a clear connection with Target 7 of the Biodiversity Plan to reduce pollution risk and the impact of pollution to levels that are not harmful to biodiversity. Here I would like, for the Air Convention, I would like to underline the importance of science in biodiversity loss, because the Air Convention is very much driven by scientific work, which guides decision-making. And also there in relation to biodiversity, there are very wide program on forest, water, vegetation, and soil, which have advanced the understanding of the complex interaction between pollution and biodiversity loss. The convention has collected data on monitoring biodiversity situation and the impact of pollution on biodiversity. And it also helped develop management concepts such as empirical critical loads, which can help guide in decision-making. So that's one element that I would like to underline on the synergies. Another, moving from air to water, the Convention on the Protection and Use of Transboundary Watercourses and International Lake, also known as the Water Convention. And we all know how important freshwater ecosystems are. I mean, they only represent 1% of land cover, and yet they are home to 25% of vertebrates. We also know that flora and fauna in freshwater habitat are declining much faster than on land and sea, which also shows the critical risk that they face. And we also know that water resources worldwide are mostly shared. 60% of the freshwater flow at the global level is shared by 2 or more countries. Transboundary basins cover almost half of the Earth's surface. And that's why the Global Biodiversity Framework calls for transboundary cooperation, which is very important and sometimes challenging. The Water Convention has at the heart the protection and conservation of biodiversity and of water-related ecosystems. So we see a clear connection with Target 2 and Target 3 of the Global Biodiversity Framework. And this is also, I would like to underline the relevance beyond the UNEC region, because the Water Convention is since 2016 open to accession by all UN member states, and this process of globalization of the convention is accelerating. Just last year, 5 countries, the Gambia, Nigeria, Iraq, Panama, and Namibia acceded to the convention. At the moment, there are 20 countries which are in the process of acceding to the convention, and already participation in its activity is almost global, with 130 countries participating in it. So the impact of the convention on freshwater ecosystem and on the implementation of the plan is very relevant outside the pan-European region. And here again, we can see benefits of transboundary water cooperation for biodiversity. Where in Switzerland, let's think about the Rhine, the International Commission for the Protection of the Rhine, which is the main instrument through which the 9 countries sharing the Rhine are implementing the convention, has focused very strongly on biodiversity in the last year. They have restored river continuity of the Rhine and its tributary. They have allowed floodplains to be flooded again. And this has brought immense positive benefits with flora and fauna coming back to the Rhine. We know the example of the salmon coming back to the Rhine and being able to swim back up to all the way to Strasbourg. So this really shows that through transboundary cooperation on water resources, biodiversity can thrive. Yes, almost there. Last example, because we talk about action on what to do, and I think it's also important how we do it. And here I would like to underline a third instrument of UNEC, the Aarhus Convention, the Convention on Access to Information, Public Participation in Decision-Making, and Access to Just and Environmental Matter, which again is one of the objectives of the Biodiversity Plan, targets 22 and 23. These are considered, as also mentioned by Yvonne, people at the center, as key means to achieve the objective of the plans. And here the cooperation between the Aarhus Convention and the CBD has always been very strong. Just last year, we jointly organized a global roundtable to assist government to implement the provision of the Cartagena Protocol and the Aarhus Convention in hand in hand. And we also organize a training on access to environment, on access to justice in that supporting the biodiversity plan, because we know that access to justice will be key in the full implementation of the plan. So these are just examples of how we cooperate, how UNEC instrument cooperate with CBD, and how UNEC is committed to support implementation of the plan. Something that I would like to conclude with is also an importance for this to work. There needs to be strong synergy and coordination at the national level. I really call for all countries to ensure that focal point of the different instruments work together, and that this so that we can build on this synergy and on jointly implementing this instrument. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Francesca, also for emphasizing the benefits of cooperation between these different regimes, the three treaties that the UNECE, or three conventions, and emphasizing the importance of the Our House Convention in providing guidance on how government should undertake this task. I'm hoping later in the panel we will get back to some of these issues around synergies and coordination at the national level, because indeed governments have a range of international commitments to undertake. Many of them are under-resourced in terms of their bureaucracies, but also in terms of the financing and the means of implementation that they have. So synergies will be key as we go forward. I'm now going to turn to Rolf Peer. You have the challenge of being the only speaker on this panel to speak for under 6 minutes, but it's my great pleasure to introduce the Executive Secretary of the Basel, Rotterdam and Stockholm Conventions. Rolf, please.
Caroline, and a good morning to you, Excellencies, colleagues, gentlemen, and of course morning and evening, afternoon to those who are following online. And it's indeed a very important honor for me, especially representing the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Conventions, three globally binding conventions, especially on this day, celebrating the International Day for Biological Biodiversity. I think, as has been said by others, the Biodiversity Plan aims to catalyze, enable, and galvanize urgent and transformative action to halt and reverse biodiversity loss. And I want to start this by giving you a little story from Greek mythology. And I'm sure you've heard about the god of the underworld called Hades, but I'm sure you've never heard of his cap. Now, the cap of Hades is what makes things invisible. And if you read about Greek mythology, there's some of the other, personalities in the Greek pantheon that have made use of Hades' cap to make themselves invisible when trying to fulfill some of their achievements. And here I want to point to something which is really invisible, and that's pollution. Pollution remains invisible until it lands on our cities in the form of smog and fog. And when we go to the hospital and we are told that our body is loaded up with toxic chemicals, then it hits home. Otherwise, we continue with business as usual, thinking that all the products we're consuming, all the products that we have, our homes, our cities, our apartments, our cars and everything is for granted because we think it just falls out of the sky, and we don't actually link it to what's happening around the world. In the mines where we extract the critical minerals for some of these products, in the factories where I would say women and other, even young people are exposed in the manufacturing of some of these products that we take for granted. So this is the invisible part, and the visible part is what we take for granted every day. And of course, on the other side, once we finish consuming those products, we don't care as long as the matter is picked up by the solid waste company every morning or every weekend. That's it. We don't care about what happens to it. We don't care whether it ends up in West Africa, where young people are burning off the electronic waste to extract gold and other metals where they can sell on the international market. We don't care where our waste ends up, whether it is big landfill, which is as big as mountains that we have here in Switzerland, where people live on those landfills trying to pick up little bits and pieces, which they can earn a living from that. We don't care. But that is the state of the situation today. And it saddens me that even today, when we're negotiating an international treaty to deal with plastic pollution, we still have people who don't believe that we have a Pacific Garden patch, which is as big as, a small continent. You see, it's invisible because it's so far away and so disconnected from us. So I think we have so much work to do in that space to really show that what we do, our activities have human societies, what happens in our offices, in the boardrooms of multinational corporations, this understanding of how connected we are as a planet, both with our biodiversity, which is important for our survival, needs to be emphasized. And here this morning, I want to give tribute to two important women that have influenced me in my career. And the first one is Jane Goodall, and I had the challenge of asking her a question. I said, why, you spent a lifetime studying chimpanzees? And you know what she told me? She told me, Rolf, I've spent big part of my life, understanding the behavior and ecology of chimpanzees, but I felt I will not be able to save them if I stay in the forest. I had to come to the cities because this is where the problem lies. And she was right. She's been right all this time. The problem is with us humans, in the cities, in the villages. We are affecting those chimpanzee populations that this woman has spent so much of her lifetime to study and to understand their behavior. The second woman, of course, is Sylvia Earle, her deepness. She has dived more than many of us here have dared to think of. She's seen the depths of the oceans, and I can quote her this morning. She said, in the worst of times, we still have a chance. The chance is slowly slipping away, and I think we're seeing that with climate change, we're seeing that with biodiversity loss. The chances that we have is slipping out of our hands, ladies and gentlemen. Colleague diplomats, negotiators, international organizations and agencies. Yes, we wake up every morning and come to our offices to write on pieces of paper, respond to emails, but we are part of a greater picture. A greater movement is to bring about this change. I know I'm in my 4 minutes here, this change in how we do things, in reversing, in halting. And this is where I put in the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm conventions, is we are there to create this platform here in Geneva, in the international negotiations, where parties from our 195 member states come together to negotiate. Yes, they each have their own specific challenges, requirements, responsibilities, but we have to come together towards a common goal. And that is towards taking more responsibility for actions, looking at solutions for sustainability, addressing the challenges that we have before us, knowing that those chimpanzees, those seals, those dolphins, those fish stocks are not to be taken for granted. The exposure of hundreds of millions of people, young children, women giving birth, all these, the toxic chemicals that we emit into the environment. So rendering the invisible visible is part of what we do at the Basel Convention, is to bring to the forefront and to show everyone that what we do, every step we take, every car we drive, we have an impact on this planet. And it's our duty and responsibility to look for sustainable ways, look for solutions, look for technological innovations, and look at value chains, look at improving trade so that it creates a better and a much more prosperous world for us to live in, where biodiversity can live in harmony with our aspirations as a human civilization. I know I've not talked a lot about my conventions. I invite you to visit our website, but I think before I bore you with what we discuss on all these technical chemicals, that to zoom in the area of pollution under Target 7, but also under Targets 10 and 16 are really very important entry points for us under the global framework of biodiversity. And we are working together with all institutions, all member states, both who attend the CBD COP, but also who attend our COPs in trying to bring this agenda forward and addressing, as I said, those big challenges. Thank you very much, and happy biodiversity.
Thank you very much, Rolf, and thank you for trusting us to understand some of the detail of the impressive work that goes on in your 3 conventions. I think what's powerful today actually is to hear the passion that you bring to this topic. And indeed, all of us, people around the world, are really lucky to have so many international civil servants, leaders of organizations that bring that passion and commitment to this work, making the invisible visible, underlining the sense of responsibility that we have, and ensuring that we connect the dots. You know, toxic pollution is bad for biodiversity, plastic pollution is bad for biodiversity, they're linked to the climate challenge, all of these things are connected to each other. And so thank you for underlining that importance of catalytic and transformative action to change the way we consume and produce in order that we recognize the impacts of what we do. So thank you very much. I'm now going to declare this part of the panel closed, and now we do another choreography. We're just a few minutes behind time, but all is under control, so no one needs to feel too pressured. But just let me ask you to join me in thanking our great panelists for coming here today and taking the time. Thank you. So just before I start this next panel, I just wanted to underline that I'm going to be strict with my bell. And just to note that one of the things I mentioned, Dana and I discussed before this panel, is it would have been amazing to have some visuals or something that was about nature in this room. We're in a pretty nature-free room here at the moment. But I did think it would be worth, I was scrolling last night trying to think of what I could say would be somewhat inspiring. And I did think there was a quote from David Attenborough, and I wish we had some of his visuals and his movies here with us, but he did say that people must feel that the natural world is important and valuable and beautiful and wonderful and an amazement and also a pleasure. And I think that this is something we have to try and think when we think about the work that we're discussing today. Nature provides us food, water, and air. It's the most precious thing we have, and we need to defend it. They're not my words, they're his. But I thought it would be useful just to bring that perspective quickly. Now we have a fantastic panel also of different actors around International Geneva and on the international stage who will look at some of the thematic connections, really, and some of the ways I'm hoping that they will help us connect the dots between the work that they do and how there are many different ways of approaching this challenge of implementing the Biodiversity Plan. So first in line, I have Chantaline Carpentier, who's a dear friend and head of trade, environment, climate change, and sustainable development, a huge portfolio at UN Trade and Development. So over to you, Chantaline, please.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. You're the best moderator ever. Happy Biodiversity Day, everyone. And thank you, Jen, for organizing this important event that is raising the profile of biodiversity. I've been asked to speak on our trade and the trade communities implementing the Biodiversity Plan. And actually, that's easy for us because UN Trade and Development, as you heard from our Deputy Secretary General, Pedro, has been doing this since 1996 as a development tool. So basically, while we acknowledge that trade is no doubt a culprit to biodiversity loss, we continue to take a positive approach to trade. And we actually believe that it is one of our best friends to achieve the alt and reverse biodiversity loss and achieve other SDGs such as climate change and poverty alleviation. But only if concrete principles and criteria implemented by well-trained communities, local communities, that can derive a sustainable livelihood and thus as an incentive to sustainably use biodiversity, connected to sustainable supply chains and with enabling policies put in place by knowledgeable decision makers are in place. And I have to say, this is exactly what our BioTrade initiative has been doing for over 25 years. It's connecting this community together. Not just bringing the trade and biodiversity together, but the whole ecosystem, as well as WTO, ITC, UNEP, IUCN, and other colleagues, CITES, and many others that are in this room, as well as the local communities, using alternative business models, such as social and solidarity economy. Those are, you can think of cooperatives and others, Women's Association and Indigenous Peoples Association, that actually use alternative economic model that do not try to maximize profit at all costs, but instead try to reach a balance between sustainable livelihood, biodiversity, and economic returns. So, the lesson learned from this biotrade work is especially important now that we're seeing a mushrooming of new initiatives on nature-based solution, bioeconomy, and several other terms that we're hearing dropping here and there. And it is very important that we do not go forward without the lessons we've learned on these critical principles and criteria that are necessary to protect these local communities, as well as to ensure we have economic models that are balanced. And let me give you an example, and Pedro did mention the socioeconomic impact of biotrade, but ABS in South Africa, through ABS Capacity Development Initiative, with national actors, have created 3,700 jobs, boosted local sales by 51%, and have increased sales by 78%, while managing 6,237 hectares. These are concrete impact on the ground for these communities. We are directly supporting the implementation of the GBF through trade by providing a platform for dialogue, collaboration, and collective action from the whole supply chain and government to co-create knowledge and solution and accelerate knowledge sharing. Let me give you a few examples. We document how many biodiversity, Many of the biodiversity plan targets can be achieved and advanced via trade-related policy instrument through sustainable use and sustainable supply chains, such as through the voluntary standard and guidelines, including biotrade principle and criteria. We co-organize side event at COP, and for the first time at the CBD, we will be at COP 16, we will be organizing a trade day with WTO and CBD and hopefully other partners to demonstrate how trade can help us achieve these objectives. And these will build on the lessons we've learned from the 7th Biotrade Congress we held here in March. We co-organized the Nature Positive Trade webinar series with UNEP World Conservation Monitoring Centers, CBD, WTO, and ITC, as well as the regional stakeholder consultations on nature positive trade for sustainable agriculture supply chain with UNEP, C4, and others. We also designed and developed a trade and biodiversity online database and visualization tool called TradeBio that since 2002 provide up-to-date data on the trade flow of biodiversity products that covering 1,814 HS subheading going back to 2010. This is where the statistics that Pedro mentioned on export come from, because before that, we didn't have those data. And finally, and Yvonne from CITES mentioned that we need to look at targets and indicators. And so we are furthering this statistical work through the informal working group on trade and biodiversity statistics that comprise over 80 members from statistics, offices, government, UN agencies, MEA's secretariat, environmental organization, think tank, academia, to map existing database so we don't duplicate the work, and design a statistical framework to analyze trade and biodiversity-based product, as well as the impact on biodiversity. Let me conclude by thanking our partners, including the Swiss State Secretariat for Economic Affairs, SECO, for their support, as well as the whole community for coming together today. Despite the fact that biotrade is being used in more than 80 countries and being recognized by the CBD and CITES COPs, trade remains an underutilized area of action for halting and reversing biodiversity loss with co-benefit to the planetary crisis. Let's join forces so we can bend the biodiversity curve and advance the biodiversity plan. And let me challenge you in helping us to achieve one of our goals, which is having 100, it's only 100 business that will commit to procure under the biotrade principle before the COP 16. You can count on us to keep leading the work on this and with your support. Thank you, Caroline.
Thank you very much, Chantaline, also for emphasizing the work that you've been doing on principles and criteria to guide the way that biodiversity is used by communities in order that it also supports local economies, local livelihoods, and that this will be central to sustainability on supply chains and so on as well. So thank you very much for underlining that and for your great work on this topic. I'm now going to turn directly to Maria Nera, who is the Director of the Department of Environment, Climate Change at Health at the World Health Organization. Maria, please.
Thank you, Caroline, and thank you all. My role here today, I suppose, is very simple. It's just to remind all of you that this is about health. This is about human health. Caroline was talking very often about connecting the dots. I think human health is the dot. I mean, if you have to select a one dot, I will recommend you to think about our own human health. And in that sense, I would like to bring you all to think not anymore on biodiversity, pollution, or climate change. Think about a human body, a little human body, each of us. I'm a medical doctor by training, so for us, this is an ecosystem. I mean, the human body is an ecosystem. And this little ecosystem, this little human body, what it needs to survive is very simple. We need water, if possible, clean, which is not always the case. We need fresh air, if possible, because most of the time it's very polluted. And we need food. Of course, we need shelter and all of that. But without these three things, there is no way we are going to survive. And unfortunately, we are, as humans, instead of protecting what is very much needed and absolutely fundamental for our survival, we are attacking and polluting everything we touch. We pollute the water, we pollute the oceans, we pollute with plastics the whole environment, we pollute the air we breathe, we pollute with the climate change creating this global warming situation. And all of that is having a very, very negative repercussion in human health. So my role today, I think, is done. It's just to remind you that please think about health when we are trying to promote the importance of keeping the biodiversity, the importance of fighting pollution, and the importance of fighting climate change. People might not see all of this huge agenda that has been described, but they are very sensitive about the argument of health. People need to understand that this is affecting our health. This is causing dramatic respiratory diseases, of course, due to the exposure to the polluted air we are breathing. But not only that, those little horrible particles, when they reach our lungs, because they are very teeny, they can go in our bloodstream, and from there, they reach any single organ. So it's affecting even our brain, which maybe justify the reason why we are not taking action in a more intelligent way. I don't have any scientific proof of that, but clearly it's affecting our neurodevelopment, so probably our intelligence as well as a society. So my call is that in few days from now, the World Health Assembly is starting. So WHO will have a resolution with all the ministers of health attending in Geneva, a resolution on climate change and health. We are putting a very strong plan of action there, reminding everyone that this is the role and the mission and the responsibility as well of the health community. The global health community is joined with all the power, the convening power we have, the institutional power we have, the scientific power we have. We are joining all of these causes in a very strong way. WHO with the CBD, we did the famous biodiversity and health report years ago that we took as well to the World Health Assembly, where ministers of health were a little bit at that time kind of surprised, but not anymore. Now they recognize that this is our business as well. At COP28, we have finally the Health Day last year, with bringing a lot of nature-based solutions, bringing the importance of the health argument for more climate action. And this year at Baku, I hope that we will have again, together with other UN, that we cannot disclose yet the theme or anything, but we will be working on something very strong, action-oriented. We need to give hope as well to our citizens, and we need to make sure that they need to understand that this is their business as well, and they need to put pressure in all of us as the UN organization, on their politicians, on their governments, on anyone. So the citizens need to understand what is all about it. My last point is saying that Colombia is becoming extremely popular these days because in addition to the biodiversity, we are planning to have in your country, sir, in March next year, the second global conference on air pollution and health. So Colombia, thank you very much for hosting us, and I hope you will be the country associated with all of the great successes and all of these big conferences, bringing a lot of results. So thank you very much, and remember, this is the health business. This is the business of our health, and if we tell people that this is affecting their lungs, maybe they will react. If you tell them that this affects their brains, maybe not. Thank you.
So thank you so much, Maria, and thank you for bringing this really strong health perspective and for your leadership on that. Indeed, it's really great in the last few years to see how much the health community and WHO in particular is stepping up on issues of plastic pollution, climate, air pollution, and so on, and helping us understand how critical our support for nature is in protecting human health, but also the role that the health community can play in supporting these environment agendas by bringing evidence, by bringing public understanding, and by making it a bit more real, I think, to government decision makers as well, who are very concerned about health. The one thing I would add is just there's that positive dimension that nature is good for our health. And it's nutritious food is better for our health. All of these things, and so we need a thriving nature for that purpose as well. So next, I'm going to move along to Benjamin Schechter, who is the coordinator and head of the Environment and climate change team at the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. Ben, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Privileged to be here with all of you today. I'm glad to be speaking after Maria because, of course, health is a human right, and that's what I'm going to talk about, among other rights. And I want to start with actually a quote that stuck with me from one of many powerful statements the Secretary General has made about the environment. And in that this particular statement, he described humanity as taking part in a suicidal war against nature. And the reason I'm starting there is because I'm so pleased that the subject or theme for CBD COP16 is peace with nature. That's what we need to achieve. And at UN Human Rights, we think that the human rights-based approach and the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment provide the roadmap to doing so, to achieving peace with nature. So why? Well, the fulfillment of a broad range of human rights depends on thriving biodiversity and healthy habitats and ecosystems. These rights include not just the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, but also the rights to food, clean air and water, health, culture, and even the right to life. Biodiversity and healthy ecosystems is an essential element of the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, along with clean air and water, healthy and nutritious food, a non-toxic environment, a safe and stable climate, participation, access to information, and access to justice in environmental matters. And we also know that biodiversity loss, and a number of people have raised this, disproportionately harms people already in vulnerable situations. So to approach biodiversity loss without understanding its impacts on people in vulnerable situations, without a human rights-based approach, we will not succeed. And it's very clear the work of the IPBES and the IPCC also indicate that rights-based approaches lead to more effective and sustainable outcomes. So the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment was recognized by the Human Rights Council as a human right, by the General Assembly as a human right, and now we need to do the work of implementing it. The couple of things I want to talk about include what that entails. It means the human rights machinery here in Geneva needs to work on environmental issues, and it needs to work on advancing the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. But it also means in multilateral environmental negotiations, in environmental processes, that the environmental machinery needs to work on human rights. And one of the biggest challenges we face is that there are a lot of people who don't agree with that. There are a lot of people who don't want to break down the silos and who don't want to work holistically towards achieving mutually interdependent objectives, which are protecting the environment and protecting people. The right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment is an umbrella for doing that. It brings together our objectives, both environmental and in terms of protecting people, under one framework. We have to do both things. I'll say a few words about some of the ways we are doing that, some of the ways the human rights machinery is addressing environmental issues. I mentioned already the Human Rights Council resolution. The Human Rights Council has its special procedures mechanisms. The Special Rapporteur on Environment has worked extensively on this issue. The Special Rapporteur on Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Many of the other special procedures mechanisms have invested time and energy in developing and articulating a rights-based approach to biodiversity action. The office itself has done the same. We have a memorandum of understanding with UNEP. We together with UNEP have produced key messages on human rights and biodiversity, and I don't think I have time to go through all of them, but I'll be happy to share those with any of you who would like at a later moment. And now duly notified by Carolyn's bell, I'm running out of time. The human rights treaty bodies, the Convention on the Rights of the Child recently issued general comment on children's rights and environment. And in the environmental discussion, OHCHR has actively engaged, and we've done so working with partners, including the UN system as a whole through the Environment Management Group Issue Management Group on Human Rights and Environment. We've put together guidance on integrating human rights in national biodiversity strategies and action plans. We engaged and had a collective messaging around the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which includes in its considerations for implementation references to a human rights-based approach, the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, gender equality, all of these things being human rights in and of themselves. The targets of the KMGBF also integrate human rights. There's a lot more I would love to share with you, and I'll be happy to continue the discussion, just flagging that the ongoing negotiations that are taking place right now in Nairobi have included many discussions of human rights, and in many instances, states have opposed language that would operationalize the commitment in Part C of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework to a human rights-based approach. So these discussions are taking place in terms of items on biodiversity and health, new areas of work for the Secretariat, marine biodiversity, the priorities for IPBES, guidance for MBSAPs, and it continues to be controversial to commit to and operationalize something that is actually agreed to in the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. So I'd invite everybody to work to changing that, because we have to have a rights-based approach if we are going to move forward effectively in this area. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ben. I think you followed Maria's example of giving us a good example of something we need to put at the center of discussion, rights-based approaches, and recalling that the international community has committed to this right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. And I think your point today on breaking down silos and recognizing that these are mutually interdependent objectives, as you said, is something that would, I hope that many will take forward today from this discussion, and especially, I think this point, which we haven't heard that much about so far today, and hopefully we will now with Lucy, is the impacts on particularly vulnerable communities, including children, as you mentioned, the rights of the child. So I think this is something we need to keep at the forefront of our minds when we think about these topics. But I'm going to turn now to Lucy Mulenke, who is the Executive Director of the Indigenous Information Network.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm really privileged to have had this discussion before from the different presenters today, because they brought up quite some very sensitive and very important issues. And I actually like when Maria was talking about the mind, because this is something that I had already put, because for us Indigenous people, we believe in a healthy environment, a healthy human being. And the human being is not only the body, but also the mind, because it keeps you going and it keeps you thinking, considering that we come from very diverse areas. We come from areas which are vulnerable, and at the same time we live in a world whereby our lands, territories, and waters are also shrinking because of pollution that has already been discussed. And that's why biodiversity for us is very crucial. We believe biodiversity is our life, it's our health, it's our food, it's our waters, it's our everything. And we collectively work together as Indigenous peoples globally with our local communities and other minorities in different parts of our world to make sure that we protect and conserve that environment. Today, as we celebrate World Biodiversity Day, to us, it's always a Biodiversity Day, because we continue living in those lands, we continue protecting and looking after that, those biodiversity that we have, everything that has life, may it be wildlife, may it be plants, may it be anything, because we depend on them. I come from Kenya, and I'm a Maasai, and I was brought up where the wildlife was. And to us, that is part of us. and it should not have been destroyed. That why I'm saying this is because he's mentioned about children and he has mentioned about why we should all work together. Indeed, we have to work together, whether you are the whole society, the whole government, everyone has to work together. And the good for us is that we've been in the plan. We have been part of the plan of protecting and also talking about biodiversity, creating awareness and enhancing the capacity of our indigenous people wherever they are. But it's not enough only for us to do alone, because the world is open now. It's not like some years back where it was different. You could work alone on your own area and succeed. But it now calls for everyone to work together, to have partnership, to work with the government, to be involved. And that is why we are celebrating this particular day and saying that you have to be part of the plan. We have to be part of the plan when the governments are looking and reviewing the NB subs. They have to include us as indigenous peoples and local communities wherever they are. We have to be part of the process. And I think the earlier panel had also discussed about why we need to be together and why we also need to look at issues of resource mobilization and look at other issues. For us indigenous people, we have been part of the plan in looking at the global biodiversity framework, even before it was approved in Montreal in the COP15. We have been working step by step. Since 1992, indigenous peoples have been collectively walking the journey together with the CBD Secretariat, with the other key players, with different partners and governments to make sure that we succeed in restoring our degraded, our destroyed biodiversity. And we will continue doing that. We'll continue to make sure that we move on to COP16 to look at the implementation. And it's really wonderful today to listen to the ambassador talking about it and the theme that they have of making peace with nature, because this is something that we really want support. As indigenous people, we have been looking at it holistically, taking the human rights approach, which has really made sure that most of the issues that we discuss are going to live with us and to stay with us. And that's why it's very, very important to ensure that. As indigenous people with the global biodiversity framework, we know that it's also going to be very serious in terms of implementation. But we have divided ourselves into different sectors, into our own expertise, and we have different issues we are following up. Indicators were mentioned here, and also other processes, 30 by 30, looking at the protected areas, looking at CITES, all these issues that have been discussed here, to make sure that we understand and we can be able to advocate and lobby and work with our governments quite clearly. I know the bell is ready to ring, but I will continue and say that as we continue together, we must make sure that the human rights approach is really focused on as governments. You must make sure you work with us as partners, business, and all these other world that we live in. If we don't work together, we'll not succeed. But if we work together and join the plan to make sure that we are also together to work and make a success in terms of looking at living in harmony with nature in the few years to come and leave the world better than we found it for our next generation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for underlining the commitment and engagement of Indigenous peoples and local communities throughout this long history of biodiversity negotiations over the years. It seems to me it's one of the MEAs in which we have the best engagement. We've best succeeded in engaging Indigenous communities, and for highlighting, thank you again for highlighting your willingness to work with others. And I noted at the beginning that Ambassador Gayon emphasized the importance to Colombia of continuing and reinforcing that engagement with Indigenous peoples as a core priority for Colombia at COP16. So hopefully that bodes well for future work on these topics. I'm now going to turn to our last speaker on this panel, which is Mustafa Kamal, Mustafa Kamal Ghia, who is the Director of Priority Action Program on Just Transitions at the International Labour Organization and has been working on issues of green economy for as long as I have been working as well. So it's really great to share this panel with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caroline. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, decent work depends on healthy ecosystems, a healthy planet, and the services that ecosystems provide to all of us. The ILO estimates that about 1.2 billion jobs rely on well-functioning ecosystems and a healthy planet. So this is why last year, here at the Palais des Nations, the Iowa tripartite constituents adopted a resolution on a just transition towards environmental sustainability, which stated, I quote, "The future of economies, societies, jobs, and livelihoods is at stake as they depend on the planet's ecosystems and natural environment." So therefore, the protection of biodiversity is not an environmental agenda and an effort only. It fundamentally is a social and an economic responsibility. It is central to achieving many sustainable development goals, including SDG 8 on economic growth and job creation. Farmers, park rangers, fishers are among the billions of workers around the world who are critical agents of change in the global fight for biodiversity. At the Biodiversity COP15 in Montreal, the ILO, UNEP, and IUCN released the first global assessment of decent work in nature-based solutions. NBS brings a significant contribution to the protection of biodiversity. That analytical work found that nearly 75 million people around the world work on nature-based solutions. An additional 20 million jobs could be generated if investments in NBS were tripled by 2030. We look forward to launching the Spanish version of the Global Assessment on Decent Work in NBS at the COP16 in Colombia this year. Now, as the COP16 focuses on the theme of peace with nature, what better way to rebuild that peace with nature than drawing on the wisdom of indigenous peoples? The International Labour Convention 169 on indigenous and tribal peoples provides one of the primary instruments and regulatory frameworks of relevance to the critical role that indigenous peoples play in sustaining global biodiversity. And this is why last year, the Iowa governing body mandated the establishment of a mechanism for dialogue with indigenous and tribal peoples on issues at the interface between environmental action, decent work, and the advancement of social justice. We are currently working to put in place that mechanism and to convene one of the first global dialogues with leaders from indigenous and tribal communities around the world. And this dialogue will most likely take place this year in Brazil, and hopefully in advance of the COP16, and will bring the voice of indigenous and tribal peoples on the promotion of environmental sustainability in the context of decent work and the advancement of social justice ahead of COP16. So please let me end by stating that the actors in the world of work are not passive agents. They are rather part of the plan, and they are active agents of change. So you can count on us to be part of the plan and to bring the contribution of the world of work. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you so much, Kamal, and thank you in particular for being the only person to be under time today. So you get a special prize from me as the moderator in that regard. But mostly, thank you for bringing this central element of how the world of work contributes. We forget that when we're talking about supporting biodiversity, we're talking about fishers, as you mentioned, and farmers, and waste pickers, and those who work in park rangers. All of these, this is the world of work, and the importance also of decent work and its dependence on how decent work also depends on a thriving environment. I also think, in just wrapping up this part of the panel, that what we've heard from this panel and the one before is this extraordinary array of decisions that governments have made in a range of different international fora, and the extent to which they're starting to connect the dots between those. Perhaps not, we're not there yet in terms of the implementation and action on those, but the commitment and the recognition of the interconnection is there, whether it's at WHO, at the Human Rights Council, at the ILO, at UNCTAD, in various international fora. We're connecting those. So I think that's a positive message to take away from this, that the governments are recognizing this. So I guess the challenge going forward is, how do we foster that international cooperation in action? And a lot of that comes to issues of enabling policy frameworks, ensuring there's adequate financing, establishing the kind of partnerships that are needed on the ground to make a difference. So in that regard, I'm going to turn now to our final panel, and I'm determined to end our session today on time. So I'll quickly ask our next 5 speakers to come up, and then we'll come to a close, hopefully just after 12:15. But let me just ask you to clap for that panel. Okay, super. So to save a few minutes, I will already start on my introduction. Voilà. Okay, so this final part of our discussion today, is focused on mobilizing and bolstering the means of implementation. So we're going to look at what different actors in the international system can do to mobilize the implementation side. So we're going to hear from some key actors working with the private sector, and also those working at the national and local levels to implement the biodiversity plans. It's my great pleasure, firstly, to introduce Jessica Smith, who is the lead on nature at UNEP-FI.
Me. Happy to bring, I think, a good news story today of the financial sector. So at UNEP-FI, we are an interface between the private finance sector and the goals and ambitions that are set at the United Nations. So in my program on nature, we really have the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework as our apex, and we are convening the private finance sector, banks, insurers, and investors to take notice of this. And we've seen a lot of activity in less than 2 years since the GBF was agreed. So we have learned a lot from the climate finance space, and very much the Article 2.1c in the Paris Climate Agreement calling for the alignment of all financial flows. So all finance flowing through the economy needs to align with the goals of the Paris Agreement. Equally, the Global Biodiversity Framework has Goal D, which took that same approach and said all the finance, public and private, that flows through our economies needs to align with the goals of halting and reversing biodiversity loss and bringing our economies and societies back in line with the boundaries of our planet. And indeed, the very clear calls in the GBF in Goal D and some of the subsequent targets under that give a crystal clear message to the finance sector that they need to come on board, and really specifically tells them what to do. And the response has been incredible. So we've seen a pace much faster than climate on nature, in part because climate is well understood now by the financial sector, but equally because there is a certain momentum around having a 2030 goal. There's opportunities, it's well understood, and there are measures that have been taken in climate that give us lessons to build on for nature. So for the alignment of a whole financial portfolio, all the types of transactions, all your engagements with clients, we are now working with banks, insurers, and investors who are setting whole of portfolio targets through various commitments, including the Principles for Responsible Banking and the Finance for Biodiversity Pledge. There's also a lot more understanding of how to assess and disclose risks. So after the task force on climate-related financial disclosures, we set up with WWF, who's in the room, Global Canopy, and UNDP, the task force on nature-related financial disclosures. And now we're getting better intel on where are these externalities across all of our market activities. There's also clear understanding of how do we innovate finance. So Target 19 calls for $200 billion in new finance to come online every year, including through innovative mechanisms like biodiversity credits, green finance, and others. And we're very excited in the coming weeks to be sharing new data showing that they have responded quantitatively to that call. So our work at UNIPIFI, we inform members. We have a roadmap for the alignment of finance. We have specific materials, whether you're a bank, an asset owner, an insurer, an asset manager. We also provide market intelligence on nature. So every year we've been running a new Green Shoots series on what are the new innovations in nature finance, which complements UNEP's overall state of finance for nature that includes public and private finance. And we're also working to shape the market. So I'm very pleased today that the Biodiversity Credit Alliance, which we convene with UNDP and more than 400 organizations, is releasing its issue paper defining a biodiversity credit. So in Target 19, parties said, let's use this innovative mechanism, and we've brought together 400 leading experts, 400 organizations who are leading experts, and a community advisory panel of Indigenous peoples and local communities. We've brought together suppliers in the market, scientists, and others to define what this credit should look like to be high integrity. And I'm very pleased that the definition includes the maintenance of biodiversity and combating threats, which means that a credit can be an instrument to value the work of Indigenous peoples and local communities as nature's stewards, who in many cases have fought for hundreds and thousands of years to maintain and manage biodiversity, which currently has not been valued. And in fact, in many parts of the world, they're still being persecuted for these actions to preserve biodiversity. So a credit can be an innovative instrument to value those efforts. Now, we are seeing a lot of capital come online, and it's only one indicator, but COP14 in Egypt had only one representative from the private finance sector. In Montreal, we had the first ever Biodiversity and Finance Day. 1,200 members of the financial sector, public and private, came, and now we're anticipating more than 5,000 members of the financial sector to come to Cali. Also, regional hubs are being set up in financial centers around the world to dial in and show support for the COP. So we're seeing a huge mobilization of the private finance sector. So first of all, there was a very clear call in the GBF, and finance has heard it. They're doing their part. However, this capital needs to be shaped by policy, connected to national biodiversity strategy and action plans, and measures need to be taken to make sure that this capital gets to the front lines where Indigenous peoples and local communities need it for their work.
Thank you very much, Jessica, for sharing that very good news about the extent to which the financial community is stepping up, but also by reminding us that the financial community needs its work to be shaped by policies and a regulatory framework that works. One of the things I think we always need to bear in mind is that governments continue to provide harmful financial incentives at the same time. So we need to think about how we can address those. And I'm quite sure that Eva Xavier will have something to say on that note as well. So Eva is the CEO of Business for Nature, which is playing a leading role in bringing together the business community also behind the GBF.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this amazing opportunity. It's such a pleasure to be here with you. And I'm really thrilled to be here on Biodiversity Day, a crucial day to focus and accelerate urgent action on the interconnected challenges we face for both people and planet. So we've heard the biodiversity crisis we face is unprecedented, and we know that the stakes are high. Hopefully, you've also noticed that businesses are beginning to wake up to the risks. Now, nature loss disrupts supply chains, it affects business resilience, and it jeopardizes their future. And I hope over the past maybe 3 to 5 years, like me, you've seen the growing momentum on nature with global initiatives like the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures that Jessica just mentioned, also the Science-Based Targets Network, SBTN. So that's really picking up pace across the corporate world. But more now needs to be done to make the crucial shift from the adoption of these frameworks, including the Global Biodiversity Framework, the Biodiversity Plan, to its implementation. And that's where business plays such a crucial role. Business has to be and is part of the plan. And there is some good news, right? There's some good news and progress from the business community since the Biodiversity Plan was adopted in Montreal. Businesses are starting to step up to take action and help deliver it, in particular with Target 15 as a critical hook. And today I'm really humbled, and I'm also very excited to announce that the first corporate nature strategies have been reviewed and published as part of a global campaign called It's Now for Nature. They include companies like GSK and Kering. This campaign, It's Now for Nature, is a joint global campaign led by the Business for Nature Coalition and many of our partners, and it really encourages business and financial institutions to develop and publish a strategy that will enable them to make a meaningful contribution towards a nature-positive world. And so just as governments are updating their NBSAPs, their national biodiversity strategies, we need business and finance to have strategies too. And so we're looking forward to an exponential increase of the number of strategies submitted to nowfornature.org ahead of COP16 and beyond. So when we say, well, what is a strategy? Why is it important? Well, for businesses, if you don't have, and indeed any part of society, if you don't have a forward-looking plan of what you're trying to achieve and how you're going to get there, you won't take the actions necessary right now. You won't be, effective. And companies need to not only reduce their negative impacts, they need to shift, restore, and regenerate to be contributing in a positive way to restoring our natural habitat and that overall goal and mission of halting and reversing nature loss by 2030. So we really hope that these first movers will be a snowball effect, create some confidence to others, because it's quite daunting for a company that has never really thought about the importance of how much they not only impact but rely on nature. They're getting up to speed, but then saying, you've got to have a strategy. We've got a nature strategy handbook. Hey, look at the companies that have already got them, get inspired, learn from it. It will never be perfect, but you've got to start right now. So that will increase the transparency, the accountability. This is super, super important. We're not complacent. We know more needs to be done. And we really need that critical mass now of companies. We need to start transforming the economic system to not only recognize and reward companies for their financial performance, but really integrate the full value of nature and people in mainstream decision-making and disclosure. So is there more to do? Yes, absolutely. But should we feel encouraged by the progress that we've made today? Yes, actually, this is a positive story. Together we can build a future where people, nature, and the planet thrive. And I personally believe that especially under the COP16 theme of peace with nature, in fact, this ambition of reaching a nature-positive, net zero, and equitable world for all is, in fact, our joint mission for humanity. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you very much for Eva, and also for underlying that more companies are recognizing the risks to their business of not properly valuing nature in their decision-making, and the impacts that they have, also the extent to which they rely on nature. So we look forward to hearing more from the Now for Nature campaign and the work of companies to develop those strategies. One of the things we hopefully can have more time to discuss another time is the role that companies and coalitions like yours can play and are playing in advocating for change in rules and regulatory systems in order to enable business to do what they should be doing. So I think that's something that we can work on collectively going forward, both at the international level and the national level, in looking at what are those cooperative frameworks and rules that will enable business to do what we need them to do. Now we're going to look briefly at the national and local implementation of the biodiversity plans, of the biodiversity plan, and to look what is happening here within Europe and also at the cantonal level here in Geneva as well. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Nicolas Bonvoisin, who is the Chief of the Operational Activities and Review Section of the Environment Division at UNECE, to tell us a little bit about your work in support of the NBSAPs.
And Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to shift the discussion indeed towards what happens at the practical national level and describe work that we have carried out within the UNECE Environmental Performance Review Programme. An environmental performance review is an assessment of the progress a country has made in reconciling its environmental and economic targets and in meeting its international commitments. Inevitably, biodiversity is a prominent feature of such reviews. We've been doing these reviews for about 30 years within the UNECE region, in Europe and Central Asia, in countries not members of OECD, and occasionally beyond the region. In 2020, we commissioned an evaluation of biodiversity in the performance reviews, and among 15 countries which we had recently reviewed, 12 had national biodiversity strategies and action plans. Most had a policy document on strengthening their protected areas network. Just 3 had a national wetlands policy. And the presence of these officially adopted strategies and programs that detail tasks are prerequisites for addressing biodiversity loss. And conversely, the lack of a policy framework indicates the lack of political commitment. So the existence of a policy framework is the first challenge that we encounter in these reviews. The second is of coherence. Often national biodiversity strategies and action plans are not consistent with other strategies, even related to biodiversity, let alone policy documents in economic sectors. But even if there is a policy, and maybe there is policy coherence, we must recall that we are talking here about policy documents, subject to the winds of politics, funding, and recently pandemics. They need implementation if they are to be more than declarative. Unfortunately, we see that implementation of adopted strategies, programs, and plans is rarely monitored. Additionally, their effectiveness is rarely evaluated, a crucial step before the elaboration of subsequent policy documents. And this will be true for the new strategies and action plans too. And the lack of policy learning has been aggravated by the lack of the late adoption of the Global Biodiversity Framework. One good practice that we have observed was inscribing the reporting on the national strategy and action plan in a country's law on nature protection. And that law requires the ministry responsible for ecology to report on measures undertaken, analyze progress based on performance indicators, and consider possible improvements. Besides the challenge of policy monitoring, the lack of credible data resulting from regular biodiversity monitoring is always a serious obstacle for sound and informed policy formulation, as underlined in fact by Yvonne a little earlier. And the absence of biodiversity monitoring, and thus of data, can seriously hamper the evaluation of the effectiveness of strategies, programs, and plans. And unfortunately, costly and resource demanding as it is, biodiversity monitoring is often the weakest area in environmental monitoring. And I would underline here the importance of partnerships to start bridging that monitoring gap, for example, with academia and civil society. Finally, I wish to turn to the question of coordination. This is something that could be discussed endlessly, but I'd like to focus in on one relationship. Generally, when reviewing biodiversity policies and actions, we find cooperation with ministries and agencies for environment, forestry, protected areas, maybe agriculture, but we never see mention of the Ministry of Economy. A few years back, there was a big push to get ministries other than the Ministry of Environment to think about climate change. And now we frequently see ministries of economy across the region tagging budget, program, project proposals with information about how they contribute to climate adaptation and mitigation. We need to see the same change for biodiversity loss. This is the level of integration of biodiversity protection that we need to achieve at the national level. The Ministry of Economy must become a key partner. It must be part of the plan. And so let me conclude that by underlining that the existence of policy at the national level, the monitoring of policy and the biodiversity itself, and the coherence of policy across the economy are vital to stop and reverse biodiversity loss. Thank you.
Also, Nicolas, for emphasizing what it takes at the national level to implement and design these plans, but also the critical role of the Ministry of Economy, which I think has been a sub-theme today of recognizing the critical importance of thinking about sustainable production and consumption. And this is clearly something that the Ministry of Economy needs to see as central to the resilience and sustainability of the national economy as well. So fantastic. Thank you for emphasizing that. I'm going to turn now to Aline Blazer, who is the lead of the Biological Corridors program of the Canton de Genève. Elle est là. Bienvenue.
Ah, je vois que j'ai une photo de moi à laquelle je ne m'attendais pas. I try to speak you in English, but I apologize for the mistakes I could do. And I just wait for my presentation because I want to show you what we do in Geneva. So I'm working for the Cantonal Office of Nature and Agriculture, and we will show you what type of action we do in Geneva. Thank you. So here is the action plan of Geneva. The first one, we work now to build a new one for the next year. There was 3 priorities in this plan action. There was 117 actions, so in 5 minutes I will not be able to show the all action, but the 3 priorities. The first one was really to keep, to secure, to protect our green infrastructure. And she's 30, but also she's more, because we speak about the non-human like wildlife that need to move on the territory, and they need corridors, wildlife corridors, they need protected areas. So we identify, and now we try to protect our green infrastructure. We also have to protect it at another level, the level of the Great Geneva, because for grand wildlife like wolf, like red deer, they have to cross between Jura to Alps, and they just traverse the Geneva state. So we identify, want to protect the green infrastructure at the level Great Geneva. We have to welcome 400,000 people more for 2050. And so we have to build a new railway, new roads, new houses, and we have to protect and increase augmenter the green infrastructure too, because we need more place for nature, but also for all the service we need like human. What we need too, you see we have different quality of green infrastructure. The blue one is really the protected area, biodiversity reservoir in French, the corridor. But in yellow, we have to increase, improve quality. It's all the work of nature into the city. And we have to restore all the conflicts, like a road with wildlife. And we built some great bridge for them, like this one, and it's an international bridge. We paid half French, half Switzerland for it. We have a big problem with light pollution in Geneva too, and we work a lot. Here is our dark infrastructure that need our bats, but we see when we build new houses into it, we always need more lights for ourselves, but we could interrupted dark infrastructure for the bats. Here we are in Palais des Nations, and you see there is only a few places with no lights, and we really have to rehabilitate the dark infrastructure into the city, state, and Great Geneva. The second target of the Biodiversity Plan was to increase the links between population and nature. And so I invite you to see the website Dans ma nature, that is une belle initiative pour découvrir, to discover nature in Geneva. And each month there is a free visit where you can discover the nature of Geneva. And the third one was to adopt the biodiversity reflex. We have to be a state exemplar. We have to give exemplarity. And also we decided yet to plant 150,000 trees in Geneva, and to give 200 million for that. And it is what we need with exemplarity of State Geneva. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you so much, Aline, also for taking forward our keeping it real theme, and to understand what this means in the local context where we're all living in a very practical sense. And congratulations for the good work that the Canton de Genève is doing in this regard. So almost our final speaker today, who's been extremely patient, is Dominique Bourgeon, who is the director of the Geneva Liaison Office of the Food and Agriculture Organization. Of course, the FAO is a key part of the wider UN family, not based in Geneva, but we thought it's important to include, as you have your office here, an excellent work that connects with so much of what's going on in international Geneva. So you have the floor.
Thank you very much. As you say, we are not based in Geneva, but quite active in Geneva, and we are very pleased to see that indeed agri-food system is included in the discussion on biodiversity in Geneva, as biodiversity is key to addressing food insecurity and malnutrition, while in the meantime, it is clear that if managed sustainably, agri-food system can contribute to conservation and restoration of biodiversity. So it's going both ways. Today, as you know, we have around 735 million people who are undernourished, and about 148 million children under 5 who are stunted. These are very big numbers. Conserving biodiversity and reducing both pressure on natural resource and ecosystem, while mitigating the uncertainties associated with climate change, has never been so important for our diets, our health, and as a matter of fact, our very survival. Thus, the transformation of agri-food systems will be critical to reversing the decline in biodiversity and achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. The Biodiversity Plan will not succeed without the active engagement of the food and agriculture sectors, which are directly related to many of the 23 targets. As a matter of fact, Target 10 in particular refers to the importance of enhancing biodiversity and sustainably manage agriculture and sustainability in agriculture, aquaculture, fisheries, and forestry. Recognizing the importance of biodiversity, FAO's work on biodiversity aims at supporting countries in balancing the need to improve the food and nutrition security and livelihoods of the poor, especially in rural areas, while at the same time preventing the degradation contamination, and loss of natural resources while building resilience to climate change. With its specialized mandate, competencies, and large field network, FAO can support countries to connect biodiversity plan with the daily realities of the world family farmers, small-scale producers, fisher folks, fish farmers, livestock keepers, pastoralists, forester and forest-dependent communities, indigenous peoples, and local communities, women and youth. Since 2019, FAO adopted a strategy on mainstreaming biodiversity across agriculture sector and developed an action plan, which were both negotiated by its members. A new action plan for the period 24-27 is actually being launched today in Rome. It fully aligns with the Biodiversity Plan, including at the target level. FAO has also recently launched the Biodiversity Knowledge Hub, where over 350 relevant resources can be searched by GBF targets. FAO also launched a global roadmap to achieve SDG 2 without breaching the 1.5 degree threshold. So how can we indeed achieve the GBF? For agri-food systems, it is critical that we implement existing tools and develop innovative and distinctive solutions. At the request of its members and in collaboration with partners, FAO supports countries in a range of areas. For example, in the revision and implementation of national biodiversity strategies and action plans, or in the alignment of agricultural policies with GBF targets, climate and restoration commitments under the UNFCCC and UNCCD, or in the monitoring and development of relevant indicators. For us, it is clear that we can no longer look at the management of natural resources, food, livelihoods, and health separately. As was said, it is really a whole of society effort. It's a whole of government effort, as my colleague said, in terms of Ministry of Economy involvement, for example. Biodiversity-friendly practices, such as sustainable intensification, agroecological and other innovative approaches should be promoted, as they can enhance natural functions and harness ecosystem benefits while sustaining productivity. Let me wrap up by reiterating that FAO will continue to upscale its support to members to implement the Biodiversity Plan and to facilitate and support the transformation of agri-food systems, including in the implementation and monitoring of relevant targets. I thank you.
So thank you, Dominique, for highlighting FAO's engagement and also the new biodiversity plan. That's good news for today, but also for really emphasizing the importance of the agricultural sector and sustainability in the way that we produce and consume food and related commodities as being central to this challenge of implementing the biodiversity plan. One of the things that I think you hinted at, but I guess will be a great topic for a future discussion, is also the critical role of international cooperation in this transformation of towards sustainability in the agricultural sector. We know that many of these products are consumed and traded internationally. So getting the framework right for that, and one that is cooperative and enables the transformation we see, will be so important. So look, we've got almost exactly on time to our very last speaker for today. It's really my great pleasure to hand over really now to Her Excellency Ambassador Christine Taudig, who is a Deputy Permanent Representative of France to the UN office here in Geneva. Thank you.
Merci. Usually when you speak the last, you just have to add, well, everything has been said. So I'm not going to repeat or elaborate on what the other said. So I'm sorry, I still have things to say. Thanks for this meeting. As you probably know, in November 23, France has published its National Biodiversity Strategy 2030, and we are therefore one of the first countries in the world to align its national strategy with the 2022 coming Montreal Biodiversity Framework. We encourage all countries to do so before the next COP in Colombia. In terms of international funding, biodiversity is the second priority of our development aid policy. We aim to increase this to 1 billion euros by 2025. As French minister in charge of biodiversity said recently, France wants to be both ambitious and mobilized to find solutions. Looking towards the future, I'd like to mention two international initiatives that are very important for France. First, the One Water Summit, which will be co-chairing with Kazakhstan. I have a scoop for all of you. I've just been informed that it has been postponed. It won't be in September anymore, but later in the autumn. But it's only postponed. So this summit is supposed, as the aim to raise awareness of water management issues at the level of head of states. We wish to highlight the actions already undertaken by various UN agencies and conventions and to demonstrate their coherence. It will also showcase examples of successful action at local and regional level. And second point, the United Nations Ocean Conference, UNOC 3, to be held in Nice in June 25, not yet postponed. Your heads of state are very welcome. This conference will have three priorities: a scientific dimension, in particular with a platform enhancing data exchanges, including biodiversity; the blue economy, including a blue economy and finance forum, in partnership with the Foundation of Prince Albert II of Monaco. And finally, the President of the Republic would like UNOC 2025 to be a rendezvous that contributes to the convergence of existing international processes: ratification of the BBNJ Treaty on the High Seas, agreements to regulate fishing at the WTO, negotiations for a plastic treaty, ratifications of the Cape Town Agreement, which aims to reinforce fishing vessel safety under the aegis of the IMO in London, emerging discussions on deep sea exploitation. In 2 weeks' time, on June 7th and 8th, the pre-UNOC conference entitled Immerse in Change will take place in San Jose, Costa Rica. Let me also seize the opportunity to point out that here in Geneva, Costa Rica and France are organizing a series of Blue Talks dedicated to the oceans. And finally, today's event is an ideal opportunity to demonstrate the importance of Geneva's contribution to environmental issues, in particular climate and biodiversity. It is important to continue the interaction with NGOs and private players, as it is organized here in Geneva. France has always promoted an enhanced synergy between these entities and between the processes for which they are responsible. This synergy of international Geneva seems crucial at the time where environmental challenges are multiplying and as we are preparing the Summit of the Future in New York. Thanks to all.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And now it just brings me to close by thanking again our tremendous panel today, and to all of you for staying really for quite a long journey through the various aspects of how we can better foster international cooperation and action to support nature, to make peace with nature, as Ambassador Gaillon highlighted at the beginning. I would like to just leave us before we close without forgetting that whilst we can celebrate, and we should, we have a lot of work to do. And it's urgent. A lot of the targets that have been set out are coming up extremely fast. So we need to move from commitment to action. I think we have in this room and around the world many of the pieces of the puzzle and the actors who are committed to making that change happen. But we will need to ramp up and do more faster. So thank you again, and may I wish you all who are going to COP16 that is a tremendous success, and thank you again to Colombia for taking leadership on that front. So thank you all.
Here you go.